You can support this podcast at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, a reporter receives a phone call from a nephew she didn't know she had. Together, they look for answers to her sister's disappearance. We'll review this season of Truth Be Told Presents She Has a Name. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of the Piper Green series of cozy mysteries, Laura Bricker. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Rebecca.
And finally, our resident Doubting Thomas, author of the City Trilogy of novels, host of Strange Arrivals, and our Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, Toby Ball. Hi, Toby.
Hey, Rebecca.
Kevin.
Yeah.
This is Thursday's podcast.
It is.
What is coming up on Monday's show?
Yeah, Monday we're going to be talking about the Hulu drama series Under the Bridge.
Oh, what's that about?
I'm not telling you.
Is it about a troll?
Am I going to have nightmares, Kevin?
You might. I don't know.
Okay.
I haven't watched it yet. People say it's really good, and it is based on a true story.
It's not about the 3 billy goats gruff?
Is that a true story?
No.
What the fuck are you actually talking about?
I'm just trying to get some clues as to what this thing is about that we're going to be watching.
Well, there's a thing called TV Guide.
There isn't.
Is TV Guide around anymore?
Online. I've looked it up online when I'm looking for something.
But you can't see it like at the supermarket checkout,
Wait.
right? I forget what day of the week TV Guides show up at my house, whether it was Wednesday or Thursday or something for the following week. And I read that goddamn magazine.
Cover to cover?
Cover to cover, that digest.
It was like...
That's how I know all about Cagney and Lacey.
And Heart to Heart.
Heart to Heart, about like what happened during the finale of MASH. I know all that stuff. And then I would scan the listings to find out, okay, what's going to be happening on Thursday night, right?
Huh.
I was totally, and obviously, I'm in the right job now because I'm...
That's how you know about Luke and Laura's wedding. It was from TV Guide.
If you don't remember, and if you're too young for this, that was like, I don't want to say like an amenity, but it was like something that everybody had to have. You had to have sort of your newspaper subscription, so you either get the morning or afternoon paper, and you had to get TV Guide.
We didn't get TV Guide.
It was...
We didn't get it.
You didn't get it?
I didn't get any of this. I got no paper,
All right.
no TV
You didn't
guide.
have TV. You were in Kenya, and you're just a...
My parents were Luddites.
Snudge. They were
we
Luddites.
never had
I wasn't
TV.
in Kenya for my entire growing up. I was in Syracuse.
Well, I had TV Guide, and I know a lot of people out there did too, because you know what? Do you remember what was on the back page of TV Guide?
Crossword puzzle.
No, not the crossword puzzle.
Goofus and Gallant.
Well, there might have been I think there was a crossword puzzle, because every other crossword puzzle, one of the clues was one blank, blah, blah, time. Because one day, those 3 letters like came up, and they were very helpful for...
Kind of like Obama is like in every New York Times crossword puzzle now.
What a gift to crossword puzzle writers. But I guess perhaps it was I don't know if it was the back page, but it was like the final advertisement was draw Tippy, the turtle, right? Or you could draw the pirate in the back of the... You don't remember this ad?
Was it
Oh, then you send it in and you can like get into art school? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
I think that was in some comic books or something.
Yeah.
But I
I
remember
drew
seeing
Tippy.
that, definitely.
Oh my goodness. You're giving me like highlights vibes right now.
Dick and Jane.
Goofus and Gallant.
Highlights. Jesus.
For those of you who aren't old enough to remember highlights, look it up. I'm not going to fill that one in for you on this episode.
I did get highlights. My grandmother used to send me a subscription to that every year for like my birthday.
I only read it
So
at the doctor's
It
office.
was at my doctor's office, yeah.
And you had to find the hidden things in the puzzle, and that required more attention than I had.
All right. Well,
This is good content.
Shocker, huh?
Yeah, they had a pediatrician. I was more interested in the aquarium. They had the little diver that would go down and little bubbles would come up.
I was very interested in the germ-covered abacus that my doctor's office had. All right. We have a podcast that we have to talk about for our business of this episode, so let's put all of our childhood memories aside, shall we, and get to it? All right, let's get to it. Leading off, let's drop that first clip.
I was just a few years out of college, and this was one of my very first TV jobs. But it was a phone call I received the first week I started that would turn out to be one of the most important stories of my life.
2 decades ago, reporter Tonya Mosley got an unexpected phone call from a man claiming to be her nephew by a half-sister she never knew about. Anita Wiley said his mom vanished in Detroit in the 1980s when he was just 14 years old.
Had you at any point held out any sliver of hope that your mom would be alive?
In a childish kind of way, I think for years I carried that optimism. That's the thing about missing persons. There is no closure. So, your mind goes in many different directions.
When Anita Wiley's body was ID'd in 2020, Tonya and Antonio teamed up to retrace her life and examine why she died. The journey changed the way the journalist looked at her hometown, her family, and herself.
Antonio and I will explore what it really takes to mend broken family ties and heal in the face of unimaginable loss, digging up buried secrets we've hidden from ourselves and each other.
From APM Studios and TMI Productions comes the latest season of Truth Be Told Presents She Has a Name. The series is part investigation and part memoir, with the host exploring Anita's troubled life and unsolved murder. It also examines Tonya and Antonio's struggles to reconcile their feelings about absent parents and their lives that could have been. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from She Has a Name. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. So Toby, this isn't really a true crime podcast, is it?
It doesn't really feel like that to me. I mean, I think it seems more as though it's both sort of family history and then kind of two people trying to work their way through sort of the facts of their lives and some of the trauma that occurred and sort of trying to make sense of it and come out on the other side. And part of that trauma for Antonio is sort of not knowing what had happened to his mother, who had disappeared when he was 14.
Yeah.
So there is like this kind of question about what happened to her, but it's not really an investigation into that. It was kind of an investigation into what were sort of the residual effects of that. Like what did her disappearing mean to other people, especially Antonio, who was her son.
Yeah. It was interesting to me, Laura, to hear about this project in Detroit that is connecting these unidentified bodies today, with people who are looking for them, and especially in Antonio's case, right?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. We've had other things that we've listened to or consumed in the last few years where like DNA testing, genetic genealogy is now being used differently. Obviously, Bear Brook is the case I always refer to, the women in the barrels, where that was a big issue. I still haven't done my own DNA testing to find out who I'm related to, so that's going to be interesting. But in this case, there was this sergeant who is investigating missing people in Detroit and talks about these cases that went back all the way to the 1940s that were not solved. And what would happen if we took DNA from these unidentified people, submitted it, and then if somebody reports their family member missing, they submit DNA, and then maybe we can make connections.
That's Detroit Police Detective Sergeant Shannon Jones giving a pep talk to a team of forensic experts at the United Memorial Gardens Cemetery.
We've done over 200 in the past 5 years. 200, and we've been able to unite right around 20 families through DNA, and then like another 10 just by revetting all the case files.
Antonio hears about this program. It sounds like it's the first of its kind type of program in the country. So Antonio was kind of not super sure about giving DNA, but had heard about other cases where DNA had reconnected families. And so ended up becoming the first match for this program, which is called Operation United's. And in addition to people voluntarily submitting their DNA, I'm wondering about how they could use the samples from the people that are unidentified that have been buried to put them into a database like we might be doing in other cases where we're trying to make connections. So I thought that was fascinating. I think there's been so much in the last few years where you hear about people finding family members they never knew they had. Like my hairdresser found out he had a daughter he never knew he had. I just find that whole area of science really interesting.
I found it incredibly sad that Anita was misidentified as being a teenager when her body was found, and that might be one of the reasons why she was never identified. And also learning that she was, 7 or 8 months pregnant. And the reason she was misidentified was because she was small. it just it doesn't seem like a lot of investigative work was put into this case, because I wonder how, and the podcast doesn't get in this too much, if another unidentified woman from a different community and was found in a different place, would they have just been like, oh, she's small, she must have been 15, and just made that assumption? It just seemed like incredibly sad to me, because the way that they would look for people is they just put out these small news briefs and hope that somebody read them. And, no one was able to make that match because they identified her as being a young teenager.
I just want to piggyback on that. It kind of reminded me of, and I know it's not necessarily the same, but it's like the same thing where we have like missing and murdered Indigenous women. And it's like they are not identified, and not necessarily because of like their body characteristics, but it's the same type of thing where you have people that are missing or dying and being given a different level of investigation in terms of what we're going to do about that.
Right. So, Kevin, you also have some notes about the type of series that this is, not straight true crime, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with everybody else that it's very much like a memoir kind of series. It kind of reminds me of You Didn't See Nothing, in the fact that you have this protagonist who's looking into a very personal crime, but also confronts things about themselves along the way. It just definitely could have been an interesting story about Tonya and Antonio reconnecting if there were no crime to also talk about. But I find that we're seeing more and more of these that are produced in a way that are interesting and not self-indulgent. And I thought that I'd give it points for that.
What do you think about Detroit itself as a character in this series?
Well, that is one of we're talking about family and stuff like that, but they bring up this like related theme about Detroit and sort of its fall into ruin and then its rise again, and sort of how thematically it kind of matches with Anita's life. She was definitely navigating life as a black woman in New Jack City in the 1980s. And so people might have said, boy, that's a really dangerous time. She was certainly already living an at-risk kind of life. And we already had like so many murder victims who were just being disposed of in buildings that were set on fire. So it's like crime on top of crime against people, against the community itself. And it's kind of one of the reasons why it took so long to identify Anita's. They said that they didn't have her limbs, right?
Yeah,
We're not discovering. They could have been incinerated in the fire, or they could have been dismembered to help delay the identification. But like, you remember, I think it was perhaps season 2 of The Wire, where it was just this very simple thing where they would, they wanted to get rid of a body, they'd put it in a building and they'd burn it. And you'd think like, oh, that's just an interesting dramatic device for this cop show. But it was something that happened a lot in certain areas. And especially, you could tell in Detroit where there was just this, massive real estate collapse, with abandoned buildings, just whole neighborhoods, just sort of the city walked away from. There's just so many places where you could dispose of a body in this particular manner. It just was quite something. Yeah. But I think that theme was throughout, they're also kind of examining where Detroit was when they were growing up, sort of how that affected their upbringing and their family stories and where it's going today.
What I found myself thinking of listening to this podcast, Toby, was the podcast we reviewed a couple years ago called Through the Cracks, because that podcast looked at the disappearance and murder of Relisha Rudd, and it looked at it through a systemic lens. And this isn't quite that, because that looked at like institutions and how all the moments where Relisha could have been caught like in a social safety net and wasn't. And this sort of takes a look at Anita's life and turns that it took and moments where she made choices or where people around her made choices. And, she was sort of sent in a direction that clearly, we're talking about victimology. We're not talking about victim blaming, but like that sort of led to this path where, she left Antonio's life and then what they learn about what happened to her later. Can you talk a little bit about that, a little bit about how they dig into that? Because like that talking about Anita, that sort of needing to understand, what Anita's life was like to sort of better illuminate, sort of the perils there. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the interesting core of the story, I guess, is what happens with her. And it seems as though she kind of gets hit with like all these perils that you would associate with poverty, right? She gets pregnant very, very young and has Antonio. She gets involved in dealing drugs at this bar that she's working at for some extra money, and then graduates to, I think, dealing stronger drugs and then doing drugs herself. She ends up becoming attached to this guy who is sort of scary and clearly very abusive. They talk in particular about one incident where she was beat up and you could see his footprint on her chest. And then she goes and lives with this guy, and I guess it was his wife. So he's in this house, basically, that's fortified to keep anybody from escaping. And that, this isn't while she's there, but it ends up being this horrific story where a fire starts and these kids, 7 kids, I think, can't get out of the house and are all burned alive because it's basically fortified to keep anybody from getting out. So it is this sort of, she's getting all these things that are perils from an impoverished environment. It seems like she's like getting them all in a lot of ways, and then, disappears, and, Antonio's life becomes less settled, right? I guess he lives by himself for a little while, and then he goes to Cleveland. And so anyway, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was a little different. I mean, Through the Cracks, I thought was like just excellent journalism and taking a look at systems and stuff like that. And this doesn't do that quite as much as just, this is what we know about this woman and what happened with her. And then, through the lens of a sister who never knew she existed, and then the son who only knew her up to a point in her life, at which point she disappeared.
Well, you'll be like a brother or sister that always existed to us if you join us on Patreon.
Oh, that's a very smooth transition to the business section.
It is, because we
not at all awkward.
All right, enough with the awkwardness now.
Okay, we just have
We're 500 episodes in. We know
yes,
this is going to be
happen.
It's gonna happen.
We're in the business section now.
This is the business section. You can get extra content, exclusive content with us on Patreon at patreon.com/partners
in crime media.
You want to do it?
No.
You could do it.
I'm just helping you.
No, you're not helping. You think you're helping, but you're not actually helping.
Okay. I don't think I know what that word means, helping.
I don't know what that word means. You get all sorts of great stuff. You can get episodes of Crime Writers on early and ad-free. You also can join us at the Bricker scale level. You get to exclusive podcasts, Leave It to Bricker. And The Empire Strips Back is the burlesque show that Laura went on a... Was this a first date?
No, that's not the one.
Oh, it's not the one?
That's the next one
that's
coming up that I invited you to, and you said, I think this man is grooming you.
Oh.
Yeah, that's true. Was this the first... By the way, the burlesque show, was this the first date you went on with this guy?
No.
It was? Okay, all right.
With Lance?
No.
With a man we're calling Lance?
Wink, Lance.
The man we're calling... No, this was not the first date with Lance, but this was the one where he was like, okay, we're going to try to test her now. And I was like, oh, really?
So for $6 a month,
you can hear about Laura's dating Lance.
But no, this is more. This is the best part, guys. Is that Laura talks about it, sits down with Lance,
fake Lance,
and the two of them have a conversation together, and it's like they're on another date.
Oh,
and we're here.
Oh,
yeah,
it's like we're on another date.
It is like you guys are on another date. And you can see, get the sense of like how you interact with each other.
Huh.
And
do we have to be judgy about it?
The term "oh my" gets thrown around quite a bit. Another great thing that you can listen to at Patreon is Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast. Next time, Toby is going to be recording a discussion around the book The Good Girls, An Ordinary Killing by Sonia Falerio. Toby, tell us about the 3 guests you got coming on.
Well, we've got Meredith Constant, Simone Paget, and Lauren Bright Pacheco.
That's great. If you are a member of the Deep Divers, you get to actually watch them record that and participate, throw your comments in the chat. That's a lot of fun. Speaking of live stuff, Rebecca and I are going to be doing an upcoming episode of Married with Podcast, live for the patrons.
Live.
Just we got to figure out the right date, because every time I try to pick something, I got a baseball game, and so...
We got to see if Lance can show up for this one.
Maybe we get Lance in. And also want to remind you that this summer we're going to be supplementing our already robust content with a special series. It's called Other People's Problems.
That's right.
This is Rebecca's game show where she goes over hot takes from Reddit and other places, and 2 contestants have to square off to get the best answer. We also have an Amazon storefront where you can see some of our favorite things. Rebecca, what are this week's Amazon recommendations?
All right, Kevin, you know I love these. The Rubbermaid Brilliance food storage containers, those BPA-free ones. We have millions of them. You can get a 5-pack for $39.98. These are the best food storage containers They're my favorite. I put the dog food I make in them. I put everything in them. You know, I love these things so much.
And Toby Ball, what are your listener-inspired deep cut recommendations?
Well, they're more interesting than Tupperware, I'll tell you that much.
Oh, come on. It's Rubbermaid.
It's not Tupperware.
Well, in that case, that's awesome. All right, first off, we got the Ripple Vegan Protein Shake Variety Pack. 20 grams nutritious plant-based pea protein. Shelf-stable, free of GMOs, soy, nut, gluten, lactose, 12 fluid ounces... parentheses P, whatever that means. And then this one, I'm going to have to kind of spell some of this stuff out because it's confusing to me. It's cut, capital K, capital U, capital T, from the cloth spelled with a K, Catherine spelled with a C, boyfriend jeans authenticity, 1230.5.
I have those. I have the cut with a cloth Catherine jeans. I love them, Toby. They're freaking awesome.
I'm not saying they're not awesome. I'm just saying it's a little confusing when you see it on the sheet. Do you have the old 1230.5s?
It's the only like mom jean, like boyfriend jean that doesn't look like really weird on me. I love them. They're really good. So whatever.
There you go. I don't have any problem with them.
All right.
Toby likes feuds among subcultures, but not among jean wearers.
Okay.
Yes.
Wear your mom jeans.
Can't we all get along?
Can't we all get along?
Yeah.
You can shop us first at amazon.com/shop/Crime Writers On.
Yes.
Earn commissions on qualified purchases.
Yes. Go to our link and then buy all the stuff you would have bought on Amazon anyway. Just do that. Just do that. That's what we're asking to do. All right, Kevin, before we end the business section, do we have any Patreon patron saints of the week this week?
Our Patreon patron saints are Lisa Goldman and Janice Stark. Bless you.
Bless you, Lisa. Bless you, Janice. Thank you for supporting us on Patreon. Thank you for everybody who supports us there. Thanks to those who don't and just muscle through the business section anyway. We appreciate all of you. Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and fade the music out right now. Is that all right?
Yes, fade it out.
Let's get that done. So, Toby, a lot of this podcast is about Tonya and Antonio, right? I mean, we hear that they've actually gotten to know each other a long time ago, but there are some things that Tonya says she's learning about Antonio as they're producing this. I am not sure I fully understand the weight of some of those revelations. I don't know if they actually revealed all of them to us, the listeners. Do you feel that way, or do you feel like maybe I just missed something?
It's kind of weird because it seems clear that Tonya doesn't really want to go further into stuff in Antonio's life than Antonio wants to.
Right.
So we're kind of given what he's willing to put out there, or that she's able to kind of find out without really digging. You find out that he was in prison for a while. And then the story, if I'm remembering this correctly, is that he went to Cleveland. And when he was in Cleveland, he kind of got this reputation as that's the guy from Detroit. And some, I guess, small-time drug dealer or whatever went up to him and asked him to do some bookkeeping for him. And
he was holding his money, yeah.
Yeah, holding his money, and then it became bookkeeping, and then it became like kind of accompanying him to deals. And my impression was that somehow that led to Antonio spending time in prison, although I don't think we find out exactly why or for how long or whatever. And that, in fact, he had known Tonya for maybe decades before she found out about this. Like, he kept this quiet. So I think, in some ways, I think it's commendable that I think we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute if we talk about episode number 7, but she doesn't want to intrude in ways on Antonio's life. But as a listener, well, I feel like I probably would be the same way if I was like doing a podcast with one of my relatives who had stuff they didn't want to tell the world about. I'd be like, yeah, sure, dude, that's fine. But as a listener, you do kind of feel like, are we getting the full picture here? Like, Antonio comes off as a very nice guy. I assume he is. But, it's hinted at that he's withholding some stuff. But then because you don't really know what it is, like I think like Rebecca was saying, you don't know if it's important stuff or whether it's just random stuff that he just doesn't want people to know because he's private about it or whatever. It didn't really bother me, but it was something that was sort of in the back of my mind and having to review the podcast. I was like, well, that was one sort of strange aspect of it, is that you're sort of tipped to the fact that you don't know everything and she doesn't know everything.
Right. I was acutely aware, by the way, and I just want to acknowledge I'm acutely aware there's a lot of this podcast that like is not about me, and it's not an experience that like I can like closely relate to. But I think as a listener, I am told again and again and again that, for instance, there are things that Antonio doesn't want to talk about or share. And the hint that I get is that it's been a strain on his personal relationships, right? And the tie that's sort of made there is we hear hints about Tonya and, you know, her feelings about her father, you know, never knowing her father, going in and seeing her father when she was a teenager, sort of this understanding that her father has kids all over the place and her grappling with her feelings about that. Antonio grappling with sort of similar feelings about, you know, his mother being missing, feeling he should have done more, but then also, you know, these sort of gaps in his being taken care of as a child. And you sort of get hints that maybe he has perpetuated that cycle in some way and that he's now trying to fix that or like change that or like communicate better or something. But all we hear is somebody telling him, it's okay, you'll be okay, you've been brave, you know, this is a natural thing, but not knowing exactly. And I'm not saying like I don't want to be intrusive either. It feels like uncomfortable, but it is hard to sort of understand what I'm listening to a lot of this podcast. I don't know, Laura, did you feel disoriented in that way? Because I found myself thinking like, where am I? Like I felt disoriented in the conversation, like maybe I had missed part of the conversation.
I felt like that a lot in this podcast, and I even like listened on a faster speed. And I think for me, what it was that I didn't feel like this narration style and the audio style of this, there was like no differentiation in the voice and the delivery and the writing for me as it was going along to sort of punch it up so I knew what to focus on in different parts. It just felt like letting things go on and on with this very soothing music in the background, and we're just telling a lot of these stories, and there's a lot of the family background, and there's a lot of Antonio's journey, but I'm like, what's happening now? Like, where are we now? And I felt like, unfortunately for me, that took away some of the impact of like, okay, this is the part that's really important that you should be listening to, or okay, this is something where a key transformation happens, or there's a plot twist. And I think, you know, that especially when you were saying like, you're okay, was super freaking weird in that last episode with the therapist.
Well, it wasn't the last episode. It was the 7th
Okay, the
episode,
last one
right?
that we listened to.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We're in the therapist office, and it was like, okay, Antonio's never been to therapy, so we're going to get him to go to therapy because he doesn't believe in therapy. And now we're going to document that he's going to therapy because he doesn't believe in therapy. And I was like, do we really need to be hearing this, I guess, at this point in this journey? Did we need to hear all of it at that point? And then at the end, when they're like, and if you want to go to therapy, we've put some resources on our website. And I was like, is there a BetterHelp ad coming along?
I had very mixed feelings about that episode. Kevin, what did you think about that episode?
I actually thought it was interesting, but I actually have an additional thought on that. It's good to hear these people try to work through their feelings and their understandings about this, because we go through a lot of these podcasts and we're like, oh, that person's looking for closure. You don't usually get to go into sort of a deep dive into their emotions and to sort of hear them come to some kind of revelation, maybe not big ones, but you know, you can see that he's what we would call doing the work, right? That he's kind of going. But I will tell you that when we got to, you know, episode 7 and we're going to therapy, I'm like starting to wonder, is this podcast running out of steam? And we've got, 3 more episodes to go. We spent an hour here with not Dr. Phil, but whoever.
Dr. Robin.
Dr. Robin, okay. Next best thing, I suppose. You know, and it was quality, and she was super sympathetic. And it's already Tonya supporting Antonio. She was probably the only person in his life where he could talk about Anita in a way where, like, because you kind of have to do this project, whereas he might not want to be bringing it up with his other aunts or his own kids, right? He doesn't feel like he wants to for all the natural reasons. So to have somebody that he kind of by default has to start working through some of this stuff, I thought that was interesting.
Well, you know, I just wish I could have saved her.
Which makes all the sense in the world. Of course, you wish that you could have saved her. At 4, there are 4-year-old little boys, or 14, or 24, or 44, who wish they could have saved someone, and particularly their mother.
But you're right, it was a whole episode. I'm sure we could have cut some of that down. I thought it was valuable to them. As a reviewer, I'm like, okay, why are we here? Because I'm wondering, are we just going to sputter to the end here?
Yeah, I mean, there were moments in it that were moving. I mean, for one, hearing her tell him, what you're doing is you're grieving things that you couldn't do, but that's a fantasy. You need to focus on what you can do and forgive yourself. I mean, that's all real. Mm-hmm. But there was also a lot of what felt to me like slogan type therapy in this conversation. I mean, Toby, you're nodding. Did you hear that as well?
Yeah, I mean, therapy doesn't rhyme. And if I hear more about fucking space and pace,
yeah,
I haven't watched Oprah or Dr. Phil or any of this stuff, so I don't know if this is a format that is common on that stuff. But as soon as it was like, we're going to give this guy his therapy on the podcast with the reporter in the room, and she's actually going to contribute to it. And it's by this Dr. Robin who wrote a book with Courtney B. Vance about, whatever. I was like, okay, so we're going to like pop psychologize this like person for everybody to hear. And that's kind of what it is. I mean, I think she connected with him in certain ways, but it was also kind of clear that she was taking what's in her book and kind of applying it to his situation.
Yeah.
And, some of the stuff I thought was like kind of comforting to him, probably like when he was like, he should have done more or whatever, and hoping that his mom would look and see that he was trying to be a good man or something. And she's like, I think your mom, if she was looking at you, would say you are a good man and stuff like that. I was like, well, okay. So I thought that was one of the weirdest episodes of any podcast we ever heard. And it just may be because I'm not familiar with that genre, which may be everywhere and just not where I look for it. But if he really wants to get therapy, go and get therapy. Talking to Dr. Robin on a podcast with the reporter in the room, that's not really therapy. And she might be able to give you some insights and stuff, and that's awesome. Right. But it's a big difference than like sitting down with an actual therapist and having a relationship and having them understand your situation and talk to you specifically about like what's going on with you and how to kind of envision it and how to move forward. And it sure as fuck is not giving you these platitudes that, I don't know, it just seemed kind of silly in some ways. But anyway, I mean, I'm sure Dr. Robin knows her stuff more than I do about this, but
I'll tell you what I didn't hear, Toby. And granted, I am not a licensed therapist. I heard a lot of book stuff. I didn't hear a lot of that person hurt you and it's okay to be hurt. I heard a lot of like, this type of person does this and this type of person does this. And it's normal to feel this way because this type of person always does this. I didn't hear you're hurt because that person hurt you. And it's like, I heard so much pain in this podcast that was unacknowledged. And that just made me so deeply sad. Like, it is okay to be hurt when your father has like many, many relationships and like, it has not made an effort to get to know you as a child. Like,
now you're talking about Tonya.
Yes, but can. But you know what I mean? It's okay to be hurt by that. And like Tonya is saying she's not, and that's okay. But it's also okay to like, to not put that in a blanket thing of like everybody who does this, it's because they all have this experience and it means this one thing.
I don't feel anger, if that's what you're asking. I don't feel anything like that. I feel more so like just more compassion for my mom. Yeah, I feel compassion for her, and I feel thankful for her. That I had a mom who, just basically sacrificed her life for me.
I just feel like that was kind of happening again and again, like with this woman, Robin. And I was like, it's also okay to say like, Antonio was fucking hurt by his experience and he might be hurting other people because of his experience. And, it didn't need to be exploitative to sort of acknowledge some of those realities that we were actually hearing as listeners.
Yeah, well, I mean, while the attention is all on Antonio and Anita, I mean, I found Tonya's own story about her absent father that you just alluded to be very, very interesting. I'm sort of taken about how Tonya aches for, like, to have a sister like Anita, like even her imaginary sister, as the only child growing up in school, she had an imaginary sister and, whose name was Anita.
Yeah.
I think that was a great detail. But I found it really interesting that she doesn't seem to have, or at least doesn't seem to express those same kind of feelings for the half siblings that she does have and that she has discovered.
We don't hear about them.
We don't hear about it, but you know, she has a conversation with one of the sisters for whatever it is. Tonya, I mean, we should acknowledge she is an NPR host. So, you know, she's doing this every day, and she stays very collected in sort of like these passages where I feel like she could be maybe a little, I don't want to say emotional, but that she could sort of open up a little more, you know, maybe let a bit of the guard down. And, you know, I guess if I were directing her, I would be like saying, like, I want her to go maybe deeper into herself and step away from like the professional, polished, yeah, and get a little more of that, because like the script is really good and her delivery is really good, but I don't feel like they're like getting the power of the two of them together.
Okay, let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out Truth Be Told Presents She Has a Name? Laura Bricker, thumbs up or thumbs down for this podcast?
So I'm going thumbs sideways on this podcast. There's nothing inherently wrong with this. It really just wasn't for me. I felt like it was more sort of a personal journey, story, diary that for me would have been more impactful if it had been structured differently. I had a hard time following the story in terms of what I should be focusing on, because it was all just like this very soothing sort of public radio approach. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in this podcast, for me, that just was not something that I was able to connect to in a way where I felt like, oh, this is something that's really getting me fired up or really interested. I mean, I think it was definitely interesting to follow along with Antonio, who is the lead character in this, as he's trying to sort of find some answers and process his story about what happened to his mother. But it wasn't something that I was like, oh, I've got to keep listening to this. So that's why I'm going thumb sideways.
Toby Ball.
Yeah, I'm a thumb sideways too. I think there are people who would probably really love this, but it's not really my thing, I guess. It's well written. I think the story is pretty compelling as like a bio and sort of it's not really a redemption story, but sort of a coming to grips with your past story and sort of the trauma. So that's all fine. But I think we talked about, like, there is a sense, like, there's just stuff that's hidden, right? That seems like it might be important. In the seventh episode, which is like this weird therapy thing, I just found very, very difficult. So for all those reasons, good and bad, I give it a thumb sideways.
Kevin Flynn.
I'm going mild thumbs up here. I like to sort of like the two different elements here. The idea that you get a call out of the blue, and this is the long lost nephew that you never knew you had, who also happens to be 5 years older than you. That seems like a very kind of freaky thing. So the aspect, which is the investigation, you know, that can only sort of go so far. They do, I think, a good job of sort of fleshing out Anita's life story. I also feel like, you know, on sort of a separate track here, the family stuff, Tonya's current views on what family are and sort of identity and things like that are interesting as well. I don't know if like it all together comes together in a very powerful way, but the individual pieces here I thought were kind of interesting. And for all that, I think that, yeah, like Toby said, there's some people I think would really, really enjoy this, but I thought that it was executed well, but just, you know, it doesn't really sing to me. So I still just have to give it a mild thumbs up.
Yeah, I'm really stuck between sideways and mild thumbs up. So I'm just going to talk that through for a second, because I see out there people like really love this podcast, and I've read some reviews of it that are really glowing. I think it's a very interesting podcast. I think it's a very meditative podcast, but I found myself listening to it and I just feel so acutely aware that I am listening to what feels like 6/8 of a conversation, not 3/4, by the way, 6/8 for some reason, where, you know, there's information that's there that I'm not being told, but I'm also not being told why I'm not being told some information. And I understand the sensitivity there, but it feels a little bit, there's a little bit of a missing piece, that the heart is there, but it's not like fully beating in some way. That being said, like, I think that the concept is really, really strong. I think that the family stuff is really, really strong. I'm going to go mild thumbs up, because I actually do think that like the potential is there. I think I'm going to listen to another episode after this one. I was definitely a stronger thumbs up before episode 7, the therapy episode. So I'm going to go mild thumbs up for now. And Kevin, if you will allow me, I'm going to listen to another episode and may revisit this review in the future.
Okay, that's fine. I think people that have come from similar family situations, I think might find this really interesting. That might be an entry point for some folks.
Yeah. Okay, that's going to do it for us. But before we go, Laura Bricker, I have to ask, do we have a cat of the week this week?
We do. So we know it is graduation season out there, high school, college graduation. Max the cat is now a doctor of literature from Vermont State University.
No, he's not.
Literature.
He didn't go to any of those classes.
I don't care. Max, a Vermont university, has bestowed the honorary degree of Doctor of Literature on Max the cat.
That fits.
A beloved member of the community. Max the cat has been an affectionate member of the Castleton family for years. So this is Vermont State University. It used to be Castleton State when I was growing up. The popular tabby cat lives in a house with his human family on the street that leads to the main entrance to campus. And so Max just decided he would go to campus, and he started hanging out with the college students, and they all know him and they all love him. He has been socializing on campus for about 4 years. Students get very excited when they see him, as would I. When I see any cat in the wild, I get very excited. They pick him up, they take selfies. He goes on tours with prospective students. And it's kind of like Leary the cat that lives over in Downing Street at the Prime Minister's residence. So Max won't be participating in graduation. He did not. But his degree will be delivered to his owners. So congratulations, Max.
Yeah, Max didn't go to any classes, but Laura Bricker, if you want to argue with folks who are going to take that up with you online, how can they find you on social media?
They can find me at Laura Bricker on Twitter and Instagram.
Toby Ball, if you want to show off how smart your cats are, how can people find you on social media?
At Toby Ball NH.
And Kevin Flynn, if you want to tell people how much you love cats, how can you be found on social media?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
If you want to follow me everywhere, Twitter and Instagram, especially if you want to go to Instagram, you can see photos of our beautiful dogs. You can find me at Reb Lavoie. Follow the show everywhere at Crime Writers On. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, but mostly I encourage you to join our incredible Facebook discussion group. Find us on Facebook, find the pinned post to join the group. We'll let you in if you seem nice. Get episodes early and ad-free at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media. You'll also get the Crime Writers On After Show, Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcasts. Our theme song was composed and performed by Ty Gibbons. Our line editor is the wonderful Livy Burdett. The executive producer of this program is Kevin Flynn. This show was recorded in Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement where we also call up random people and say, hey, we're related. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later. When
Partners in Crime Media.